sync up the audio. Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and this week I'm going to show you how I built these modern side tables. These are to replace some outdated tables for my client, so I went pretty modern with walnut, black epoxy, and copper spacers. I have all the plans for free to build these tables in the description below, so without further ado, let's get into the build. I started this build by picking out all the walnut for the legs, about 3 inches wide and 1.5 inches thick. That will give me a final thickness of 1 1/4 after milling. These two book match slabs came from the offcuts of a modern walnut desk I built a few videos back. After I got them all flat using my router sled, I cut them down to their rough dimensions so that I could pour the epoxy. As always, I take multiple passes to cut stock this thick so that I get a nice clean cut without burning. Once I had the two slabs all cut, I got to making the mold and cut out all the pieces using my track saw again. I assembled the mold using silicone, brad nails, and screws as always, but instead of attaching the sides on top of the base, I attached them on the side, which just made screwing them in a lot easier. I also added silicone to all the inside edges just to prevent any possibility of leaks, and coated the entire inside of the mold with 2 layers of paste wax. Now that I had the mold all completed, I got to clean up the edges of the 2 slabs. I did this using a wire wheel on my angle grinder, which made quick work of the bark. Both walnut slabs were sealed on all sides to prevent any of the black epoxy from staining the wood or air bubbles releasing while drying. This also prevents the wood on top from absorbing any moisture while in the mold and cupping. Always make sure to use the correct mask while using epoxy or finishes. Full list of tools and gear that I use is in the description below if you want to pick anything up you see in these videos. After about 8 hours, the epoxy is nice and tacky, so I can do the main pour now. If you wait too long, wait till the epoxy dries completely and sand it lightly before doing the next pour. I mixed up an entire 3-gallon kit of epoxy from Rusty Design Canada and added a ton of pigment to get an opaque black. Make sure you stir for at least 5 minutes, scraping the sides and bottom so that the resin and hardener are mixed equally. While the epoxy is drying, I got to cutting out templates for the legs out of 1/4 inch plywood. I traced out all the leg components onto the walnut I had selected earlier and made sure to label all the pieces so that I'd have consistent color and grain patterns across the legs. Once I had all the leg components cut to their rough width, I made a test cut on the miter saw and cut the angle on one side of all the pieces. I cut all the tapers on the legs using my track saw before setting up a stop block and cutting the angle on the other side so that all the pieces would be the exact same length. I joined all the legs together using dowels, first adding 2 holes to the horizontal part of the leg, before adding these 2 metal pins to the dowel holes to transfer over the hole locations onto the vertical pieces. I added some temporary angled blocks with some CA glue and green tape so that the clamps stay on during the glue up. I waited a full 6 days before demolding the top so that I knew it was completely dry and I could work with it right away. I flattened both the top and bottom using this 2.5-inch carbide router bit from Tools Today. This is an amazing router bit that takes off a ton of material at a time, but as you can see, if you move too quickly with this bit, you'll get a lot of chip out, so it's important to take your time on the final passes. To start the sanding process and to get rid of all the lines left by the router, I use 60 grit sandpaper. Next, I sanded the entire top and the legs with 100 grit sandpaper before filling any gaps on the legs, cutting the top to final dimensions, and adding a chamfer. I ended up cutting the top a little bit bigger than in my sketch, so the final dimensions are 29.5 by 16.5. Because the top was sanded to 100 grit, I could now see any little imperfections and fill them with black CA glue. I followed the same procedure as I always do in preparation for Osmo's 3043. This means using 6 different sandpapers to sand all the way up to 320 grit, and I'll include a better video in the description below if you want to see a more detailed look into this. I used stretchers to connect the 2 legs together using dowels again, making sure that everything was square before I let it dry. After I was finished sanding, I wiped everything down with mineral spirits to remove all the dust and let them dry overnight. To add a little bit of character to the tables, I added these copper spacers in between the legs and the tabletop. Now you can cut these out with the hacksaw, which will definitely give you a good workout, but I opted to use my miter saw to get more accurate cuts, and I just went really slow because I just have a wood blade on my miter saw. To get a nice shine out of the copper piping, I used this super fine steel wool, and instead of buffing each piece by hand, I wrapped some shop towel around a wire wheel attachment and used my drill to spin it while holding the steel wool. My camera ended up dying while applying the first coat of finish, but I'll go in depth on the second coat. After the first coat of finish was dry, I got to attaching the copper spacers to the legs. At this point, all I had was an idea that I hoped would work out. I started by drilling some pilot holes and adding some wood screws to the legs where the spacers will be added. These will allow something for the epoxy to grip onto so these spacers don't fall off. I attached all the spacers temporarily with some green tape and then added some 5-minute epoxy in the center to lock them down. This definitely seems to be plenty strong as I'm able to pick up the base from one spacer. Before applying the second coat of Osmo, I lightly sanded all the components with 600 grit sandpaper. You don't have to sand too much, you just want to get a nice haze over everything. After sanding, I wiped down everything with the blue shop towel and started applying the second coat of finish. I start by applying a small amount of finish to the bottom sides of both the tops, buffing with a white Scotch-Brite. Once I buffed for a while and I don't see streaking anymore, I flip the top over to finish the top side. I start by buffing and finish on the sides before repeating the steps that I did on the bottom to the top. Except after buffing for a while, I flip the white pad over to the clean side and buff until there's no residue left. The finish won't look perfect right away, but if you've done it correctly, it should look perfect after 24 hours. My biggest piece of advice here is to only use a small amount of finish, as you can always add more, but if you do end up using too much, just use a blue shop towel to wipe off the excess and continue buffing. The final step of this process was to add threaded inserts to the top and these little wooden cylinders that will sit inside the copper spacers. And with that, this project is finally done, and man, am I happy with the outcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and definitely stick around to the end as I have some amazing shots of these side tables that will definitely blow you away. Hope you enjoy. Peace.